All right, the final thing that I'm going to talk about, not just for this chapter, but for this course, Introductory Psychology, this playlist on my YouTube, is going to be the effectiveness of psychotherapy, or is psychotherapy effective? One thing I can share is sometimes when I go onto the internet, looking at social media, and I keep jumping around from different social media because I'll find that I like a social media site and then it starts to be unfun in some way. But various social media apps and whatnot that I've used, I will see every once in a while somebody will come on and make disparaging remarks either about therapy or about medication. Pretty common thing. Like people will be like, "Oh, these therapists don't know what they're doing. And they'll say things like, "You just need exercise for your depression." And I'm like, "Oh, actually, some people are not going to get better no matter how much exercise they get." Or they'll say the same thing about antidepressants. Like, "Oh, well, the problem with society is all these people are on antidepressants. They need to eat organic food and get out in the fresh air." All right, so what does research actually show about the effectiveness of some of the treatments that we've talked about? All right, so when we look at therapy as a whole, most people who receive psychotherapy of any sort, we talked about different sorts, any sort of psychotherapy, most people who receive psychotherapy report improvement, and some therapy appears to be better than no therapy at all. Okay? We do have studies that will compare people who don't get any therapy to people who get therapy. We definitely see a difference between getting any type of therapy, no matter what the specific version is. Any type of therapy seems to be beneficial compared to no therapy at all. Now, can sometimes people get better without therapy? Yes, you can have this thing called spontaneous remission. Sometimes people's symptoms, they just fade on their own, and that's more likely with some symptoms compared to others. But yes, that can happen. Is it guaranteed to happen? No. Is it guaranteed to happen quickly? No. And so we see that therapy in general is effective. One of the biggest efforts at looking at this was something called a meta-analysis. Performing a meta-analysis on psychotherapy and the overall result, and this is, if you don't know, this is a statistical term where they take a bunch of studies and they analyze them together using statistics to look at something called an overall effect size, and they found overall therapy was effective. And all the therapies, all the different types of therapies came out as effective. And so when we look at therapy overall in our research, 80%, that's a good number to know, my students, giving you a hint, tests and things. 80% of treated people have better outcomes than the average untreated person, 80%. All right, so you're generally, as a group, people are better off with therapy versus no therapy. Now, what about when you have medication? Some people do well on just medication. Some people do well on just therapy. But when you have therapy plus medication, people generally do better when they have both. All right, if you can get insurance to cover it, it's better to try to have both, therapy and medication. All right, now, final note about just therapy in general. If any of you are shopping around for a therapist, keep in mind there's not just different types of therapy, there are different types of people who give therapy. You've got your counselors, possibly mental health social workers, people who just call themselves therapists, people who are psychologists, psychiatrists. One thing you're going to want to look for is what are people's credentials. The word therapist is not protected by law by some other terms are. Like if you're going to call yourself a licensed professional counselor, you have to have gone through licensing. Calling yourself a psychologist, that means that you have certain credentials, like you have a doctoral degree in psychology. A psychiatrist, you have to have a medical degree. So just always look up the credentials of anybody who might be delivering therapy to you. If they just say they're a therapist or maybe a life coach or something like that, and they don't have special training or licensure or board certification, that not always the best situation to be in. So just final note on that. And then the other thing, okay, so my final message being, there are definitely barriers to accessing therapy. But if you are able to access therapy, there are tremendous benefit, or there are evidence for benefits for therapy. It doesn't always get tremendous respect, but we definitely have evidence that it is effective. Right, that's the end of this particular class. So to my students, good luck on your last test and your final exam and all of your other classes. To anyone joining from the outside, if you are also enrolled in a class right now, I wish you the best.